very, very interesting to me that people want to stay here, slog it out, have a heart attack, get mentally ill, because that's what's happening. The rat race isn't healthy, guys, and that's what it is here in Canada, and it's even worse across the border in the United States. Why did I leave the UK, and why am I now leaving Canada? So we're going to get into that in today's video, so if that's something you're interested in, stick around. Right now it's 17 degrees here in Calgary, but we're going to get hit with 5 days of snow and up to 45 centimeters. But anyway, this isn't a weather report, so why the heck did I leave the UK in the first place and move to Canada? And why am I now leaving Canada? Like, what has made me make this decision? And I will describe it to you, and hopefully you can learn from my mistakes, maybe, even though I don't regret anything, and I hope you can learn from my experiences. So essentially what happened, guys, was we were living in the UK. It was post global financial crisis after 2008. I was working a job in engineering at that time, and basically what happened was I ended up getting laid off from that job. There was very limited work opportunities. Even if you went to the big city, there was just very limited work opportunities. So I started poking around, I started looking around. I always had itchy feet and wanted to move. I'd been to America in the past, and I'd seen that people were living a better life, or so I thought in my head, over here. And the space was one of the biggest draws. The space, the better healthcare system. And we visited Canada way back in 2011, and we fell in love with the country. We fell in love with the people. We visited in summer, of course, so we didn't see the winter, but we fell in love with the people, we fell in love with the place, and we thought, hey, you know, this is like the US, just better. And then basically what happened was we didn't move to 3 or 4 years after that. And it's just like I've been saying with this move, currently leaving Canada. You know, you can make that decision to leave 3-4 years out before you actually leave. Now, I'm a guy who likes to get things in a row, so I've got everything lined up and ready for when that I actually move or leave, so that I'm not, you know, just moving to a place and then looking for a job and spinning my wheels and everything like that. So anyways, I left the UK because of lack of work opportunities. I come to Canada. We ended up in Toronto, obviously, and you know, we arrived in Canada way back in 2016, around 2016. And when we arrived, you know, Canada was just really starting to go through this housing bubble in full force. It was when the housing market was just going to the stratosphere in Toronto. It was absolutely insane. And you know, I was looking at that and I was just like, this is crazy. Surely this isn't gonna last. I saw the mad speculation. It reminded me of 2008, but that continued to go on and on and on. And then we moved out to Alberta, and once again, I don't regret any of this stuff, because you know, I've learned so much about myself. I've pushed myself out of my comfort zone, moving to places like Alberta, moving to places like Canada. I've met amazing people, so I don't regret it. But we moved out here. Now, the one thing that I can't deal with here is the weather. Like I said, beautiful right now. We barely ever get days like this. So, you know, don't watch my videos and say, oh yeah, look, it's always great weather there, because I don't film when it's bad weather. And the weather is just crazy here. Mad fluctuations. I just couldn't deal with it. A lot of people suffer with headaches, me being one of them. It's just an impossible climate to live in my opinion, for me. That doesn't mean that it's impossible for anybody else, but for me. And the high cost of living here, you know, when we arrived in Calgary, everything was like 20%, 30% more expensive than Toronto, where we come from. And you always had the lower rents and the lower cost of homes, which kind of balanced things out, and it was higher incomes here, so that kind of helped as well. So you're always actually better off in Alberta. But that has absolutely dramatically shifted the other way around now, to the point where, you know, it's no longer cheap to rent a place here. It's no longer cheap to buy a place. It's not cheap to rent or buy a place in Canada anymore. The inflation in Alberta in particular has been rampant, and specifically in Calgary, inflation has been the highest in the country. So the rate of rise of goods and services just hasn't kept up, and people's wages have not kept up at all. The median wages are still rock bottom, and I'll put it on the screen for you right now. So the thing is, the cost of living is just absolutely crazy here. And you know, I realized pretty quickly that essentially I'd moved to a place that, yes, it was better than the UK, but it was the same type of rat race. It was the same type of struggle where people were just getting into insane amounts of debt that didn't seem to make any sense to me, and they were struggling, and people people were starting to get mentally ill and disturbed, and that has just continued and absolutely skyrocketed since then. And also crime and public safety, like crime, oh my gosh, has absolutely skyrocketed in this city as well. You know, there's a shooting every other day. You know, there's all kinds of things that go on that make you think, like, where am I living? Am I living in a third world country? So all these things kind of compound over time, and right now there's a ton of people leaving. There's a ton of people leaving Canada. In fact, we went into the bank the other day, and it was interesting because I told her that we were leaving, and she was like, man, everybody is leaving. Like, I get this all the time. There's so many people leaving. So yeah, there's a lot of people coming into Canada, but at the same time, you've got a lot of people going out as well. And the main thing, the main issue every single time is the cost of living. It's the cost of living that is what gets people the hardest, because it just doesn't make sense anymore. And I've seen this rodeo before, no pun intended, here in Calgary, but I've seen it before. It happened in the UK, the wage compression, the stagnation that occurred after 2008. You know, there will undoubtedly be a massive recession here in Canada, and then the government will come out and say, yes, we've recovered from it, and it will be a continued struggle for the average person for the next 10, 15 years, exactly like the UK. In fact, the UK never even recovered from the global financial crisis. When I go back there, I'm just shocked at how fast the country has gone downhill. It has absolutely collapsed. Living standards there have collapsed. And the same thing is now happening in Canada, and it's accelerating. The thing is, I'm not idolizing politicians, saying that this politician's going to change things or this one will, because they won't, guys. They're just maintaining the status quo, exactly like politicians in the UK as well. Things just don't change that much. Things don't even change in the United States. People just argue and think it does. But the reality is, the politics, the makeup, the power structures behind the scenes, they don't change. And Canada has a real problem with productivity and the oligarchy setup that it has. So Canada has this oligarchy setup, and it's in nearly every industry that you can think of: banking, grocery stores, travel, where they just have a few providers who monopolize the entire thing so they can charge and gouge Canadians. The hilarious thing is the banking system. If you look at the same banks that serve Canadians and are Canadian banks that operate in the US, they charge way less fees. Why is that? Because there's more competition in the United States when it comes to banking. Here, there is no competition because it's just an oligarchy, it's a power structure, and the government passes legislation that seems protectionist, like the ones for the airline, that a certain amount has to be Canadian owned, to push out other players and make it harder and harder through red tape and regulation for other companies to come here and compete in the Canadian market. So you have a really broken economy here in Canada where just nothing is getting better. And because of those oligarchies and power structures, and because the wealth distribution has gone so out of whack now, it's just become evident to us that we need to better ourselves and move on. There is no point in anybody, especially people who have no family or attachments to Canada, staying here. There's just no point. My family isn't here, and that's one of the things that I miss the most from the UK. So obviously that's a pain point for me. So it's got to be worth it to move to another country. Now, obviously, from what you've gathered in this video, we're not going back to the UK, and you'll find out later this year where we're actually going. But you know, it's very, very interesting to me that people want to stay here, slog it out, have a heart attack, get mentally ill, because that's what's happening. The rat race isn't healthy, guys. And that's what it is here in Canada, and it's even worse across the border in the United States. The rat race is even worse, and you can just replace a housing bubble with a healthcare bubble. I mean, at least you can get healthcare services in the United States. The access to healthcare is better than here in Canada, but the cost of that can bankrupt you. So, you know, these countries, I've realized now, they're all falling. It's just a case of which ship is sinking at the most rapid rate. And when it comes to Canada, we jumped on another sinking ship, but again, I don't regret it. I've learned so much. I've made mistakes. You know, there's nothing that I would regret doing. I don't regret coming here to Alberta. I don't regret moving at all. It's been a great life experience, and I hope one day things get better so I can come back, because that's the saddest thing about this country. It has so much potential that could be unlocked. Like the people are just the most lovely people ever, and there's abundant natural resources that the world needs right now. Even if the world wants to go green. They need those natural resources, and they need them from a country like Canada that is at least going to get them out the ground in the most green way that they can. And it's a globalist agenda. It's not just one politician and politics like a lot of people think. You see the same thing happening in lots of different countries in the G7. So anyway, guys, if you've enjoyed this video, I'd highly recommend that you watch this video. It is incredibly popular. I will see you in the next video. Thanks for staying on the channel. I try and do monthly videos, and I'll see you next time. Take care.